Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Monday afternoon. Joining us from San Jose, California, where he's taken up residence, Tim Bontemps.
I get to go home to New York in a few hours for a few hours, and then I fly to Northeast Ohio. Can't imagine why.
You'll be welcomed. You
I will be welcomed.
Our next pod,
a pleasant welcome, but I'll be welcomed, I'm sure.
Right. Our next pod will be recorded on Friday, by the way, the live pod in Akron. So FY for a schedule change this week. Joining us from Dallas, Texas. He's not banned from St. Vincent St. Mary High School yet. We'll see how his behavior is on Friday. Ban MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Hey, I am going to set up a little tomato stand right outside the entrance. I'm going to try to capitalize on the Bontemps hate.
Three for $1.
Oh, no. It'll be like, one for $5. I mean, if you're going to be pelting Bontemps with tomatoes, you at least got to pay the price.
Yeah. We can't, they got fall play. We got to keep the auditorium in good shape.
Yeah, we got to keep the room clean.
Were you ever part of a food fight in the cafeteria there? Anything along those lines?
I wasn't part of one, but one of my all-time memories from high school involved a disastrous situation. I think I was a sophomore. These two football players, two of the biggest guys in the school, got locked into they were arguing about something during lunch. They got locked into an arm hold with each other. And I swear to God, they were both like defensive tackles. And the one guy drove the other guy back. And I remember I could see straight down the line, and they were headed towards the salad bar.
Oh.
And the woman who worked behind the salad bar had this horrified look at her face and dove to safety. And it was right out of a cartoon. They went crashing into the salad bar, lettuce, carrots, croutons all over the place. And there was this one teacher who none of us really liked. She comes running over to try to break it up, and she wipes out on the salad dressing that it's on the floor. Oof. She wipes out and goes flying across the floor. And one gentleman from the biggest kid in my class, probably one of the 2 or 3 people in the whole building that could have broken this up, also a football player, and he actually played Division I offensive line, went over and broke it up. So it was not a food fight, but it resulted in a gigantic mess. And the teacher was so mad, and she was covered in ranch dressing, and it was very hard not to laugh because it's hilarious at the memory. And it
is one of those things that no matter how much you try not to laugh, it's impossible.
Oh my God. I mean, she was so mad, and we were just trying to swallow our laughter at her. And the funny thing is that, the guy from my class who broke it up, he so many times in his high school years, he got in trouble for stuff he didn't do. Like one time, I think he got suspended for setting off a cherry bomb in the bathroom, and we all knew he didn't do it. And she came over and got mad at him. He was breaking it up. He saved the taco bar from going next, because I think that was one down the line. So anyway. Sorry, we digress. We do talk about the NBA.
Hey, more St. Vincent St. Mary's stories Friday night, baby.
Yeah. So anyway, the football team stunk when I was there too. They were big guys, but they were not good at football. Sorry.
Wow. I hope those guys don't show up Friday night, because you might.
I haven't named any of them. What are they going to do? All right. That's later this week.
Or the golf team stunk too.
The golf team was good. I wasn't particularly that much of an assistance to it, but the golf team did finish 5th my senior year. We had a great player. But anyway, I digress. We had big NBA news over the weekend. Jamal Murray, and an interesting Labor Day max contract. You do not see too many Labor Day max contracts unless there's that's when a deal can officially be signed. And this was not the case for Jamal Murray. But Jamal Murray comes to terms on a 4-year contract extension, $208 million. Now, as of the time we're recording this, Monday afternoon, the contract hasn't officially been processed yet. I don't know if he's signed it. Maybe Later today, there'll be a press release from the Nuggets. He signed it. So we don't know all the terms if it's all guaranteed. For the sake of this discussion, we're going to assume that all 4 years and 108 million of it is guaranteed.
208.
208 million of it is guaranteed.
It would look a lot better if it was 108.
Yeah, I was going to say 108. I don't
That would
think
be a great deal for the
Yeah.
Nuggets. We've talked about this a lot. We've debated on what we would do if we were the Nuggets. 2 weeks ago, Josh Kroenke, the team's governor, gave an interview where he talked about Jamal's struggles playing for Team Canada over the summer, where he referenced that he hasn't been 100%, which led you to wonder where his health was, especially after he was banged up during last season and then in the playoffs. But obviously the Nuggets got to a place. And look, MacMahon, you've been your keep championship players, KCP moniker. I feel like we're going to be hearing that a lot over the course of the year. Letting Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walk and then not getting an extension done with Jamal Murray, even if it was a hard decision, would have been a tough look for the Nuggets. They haven't been afraid to have a tough look in the past when it comes to spending, but Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic have proven to be a championship duo. I get why they did it, but there's nobody who wouldn't agree that there's a significant level of risk in this deal.
Yeah, I completely get why they did it. You have won a championship with this guy. Age-wise, he should be in his prime. It would be difficult to have this situation lingering as you open up camp, much less go into the season. But it's a different thing than the KCP deal. The KCP deal, you had to make a decision. He was either going to be on your roster or he wasn't. This was not a deal where you either make the decision to pay him the full boat now or you lose him. And just, again, coming off of the way he looked in the playoffs where he had some moments, he had some game winners, but overall was a poor playoffs for him. And this is a guy who obviously has been great in playoffs before, but you got that really rough in the Olympics. I could not have committed to full max at this point.
I mean, look, the story of the Nuggets is their really unwillingness to have real negotiations with their elite players and their unwillingness on the other end to go deep into the tax to pay to keep this team together. They gave Michael Porter Jr. the fund max without any discussion, really, with a lot of injury history. And Michael Porter Jr.
And he looked bad. Like he was not moving well that preseason and needed a back surgery thereafter. Like,
yeah,
that's giving him it to him with his previous history is one thing. Like I've talked about before on the podcast, I was at a Nuggets preseason game that year and he botched a dunk I was at because he couldn't get up and they gave him the deal like 10 days later.
Yep. They gave Jamal Murray a full max deal. And again, Jamal Murray, they won a title with Jamal Murray. I'm not saying it was a bad contract, but Jamal Murray's never made an all-star team. He's never made an all-NBA team. He's never been particularly close to either. And that could have been negotiated to where they had some more financial flexibility. And if they were willing to if they were the Warriors and would spend $250 million in payroll, it wouldn't matter because then you could just say, all right, we're just going to pay everybody, keep the band together, we'll be fine. When they're losing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, when they are, as Tim has mentioned several times, they're extending Zeke Naji, which is a contract that now is stuck on their books that they can't really do anything with. Again, you add up these $8 or $10 million, 2 or 3 different places, that's a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That is, do they have another, some sort of veteran that they have on a more than minimum contract that can help them in the playoffs? Like, they haven't done a good job
they paid
of managing.
Reggie Jackson last year. Like, who was offering Reggie Jackson the mid-level or whatever he got? I mean, that's a fair statement.
And then they gave up 3 second-round picks to get off of that.
Anybody can sign a bad contract. I won't criticize a team for signing a bad contract.
No, it's fine. But it's just the Nuggets have been a team that historically has been averse to spending deep into the tax. If you're going to do that, you then need to really mind your P's and Q's when it comes to what dollars you spend. And the extra money they've given on these deals has put them in a position where they're now losing key players off their team. And as we've talked about a bunch, this is a huge season for Calvin Booth and a huge season for Denver because they have really bet the farm on these young players being able to step in and perform at a high level. You know, when Calvin Booth going into last season was talking about winning, 3 or 4 titles over the next several years. This was a long-term plan that they had in place to be sustainably good for a long time. Maybe it'll work out fine and it'll look great, but as it sits here right now, the team is appreciably worse. And again, as Tim said it perfectly, they've committed a full max contract to a guy who was banged up at the end of last season, struggled in the playoffs, was awful in the Olympics. And, the other thing is too, who was paying him next summer? There's only a couple teams with money next summer. And this goes back to the whole thing we've talked about a bunch, where we've seen these restricted free agents all get, pretty much straight away max deals. And there just hasn't been a willingness by a lot of teams to really sit down and negotiate on these contracts. And given how strict the financial penalties are now, I find it very interesting that everybody's just throwing this money around and not really counting dollars, because I think it's going to come back to be a problem for teams in the future.
Yeah, you've only got a couple of teams potentially next summer, and we'll see. I guess more could move money around, but as it stands now, it looks like there's only a couple of teams that are going to be able to be aggressive shoppers at that kind of price point in free agency next summer.
And they're not contenders.
Yeah. We could discuss what the Rockets' role might be, but whatever. That's a lot of ifs. The point being is there's not necessarily a lot of risk in waiting other than the funky vibes going in to a season after you already lost the guy who was starting next to Jamal.
And there's a value to that. I mean, I don't know if it's worth what they're giving up here, but there's a value to having Jamal Murray happy and satisfied. May be a bad proposition, but it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. But if this was an easy decision, a no-brainer type of decision, it wouldn't have happened in September, right? It would, and so, he's in the Olympics. Okay, it would have happened the day after Canada got home from the Olympics.
I mean, that's the weird part. Honestly, that's the weird part about it, right? It didn't happen on June 30th, and it didn't happen right after the Olympics.
Yeah.
So why now? Why are you doing a full max Labor Day weekend? If you're waiting this long, see what it looks like in preseason. Actually negotiated some.
Yes, that's why I made the comment that we haven't seen the contract details yet, because maybe it's a straight full guarantee, 4 years, what have you. But maybe there's something in there that implies there was a concession. And I wish I could tell you that I know, but I don't.
Right.
So, and this may be a dated statement when this pod posts. We don't do this in real time, but it's possible there's a concession. If there's not a concession on the Murray side, I think the timing is a very fair thing to say. As you say, Bontemps, if for no other reason, let's take a look at him in preseason. Let's see where he's at. Where's his health? How does he look out there? There's value to that.
It's just odd timing to sign a full. I mean, again, and maybe it'll look different, but I think it's safe to assume it's probably the full boat. And if you got the full boat now, there's just a lot of questions about that. Why today?
Yeah, the timing's odd. What we've seen from him recently is not encouraging. I will say though, last year at age 26. He had what I think you can very strongly argue was the best season in his career. Matched his career high in scoring, 21.2, averaged 6.5 assists, a career high. Had his best shooting season. And we know how well he works with Joker. We know they have not just the potential, but they've proven to be capable of being a championship duo. Having said all that, with his injury history, I'm curious to see what the actual details of the contracts are.
His resume also has some spectacular playoff performances, including two game winners that he had against the Lakers.
And look, when they won the when they won the championship, he had a superstar playoff run. And
sure did.
And there was a thing, Bubble Murray, and he got sick of hearing that. Because it wasn't necessarily Bubble Murray. It was more playoff Murray. He's a guy who had proven to be able to raise his game during the playoffs. It didn't happen last year, despite the fact that he hit some big shots.
Well, and that's the thing. Like if they had won that game 7, maybe this entire tenor of this conversation is different, right? But you follow that up with the way he played for Canada. This was like, hey, Jamal's playing for Team Canada finally. Got him and Shea out there. Like, and he obviously did not play well. Denver's going to be one of the more interesting teams to watch in the league for a variety of reasons, and this is certainly one of them.
All right. So last week, Bontemps, you came up with a couple of pieces looking at roster holes that teams really still needed to address. Maybe not by the beginning of the season, but certainly, within next season. And you had the Nuggets at the top of the list on the Western Conference with their 3-point shooting, because they're a low volume 3-point shooting team just in general amongst the top teams in the league last year. They were one of the lowest volume. Their percent, I'm not so much stuck on their percentages, but their volume. And we know in the modern NBA that volume of 3-point shooting means so much because it's a mathematics equation in some cases. And they lost Caldwell Pope, who was, I'm not sure he was their leading 3-point attempt guy, but he had to be first or second with him and Michael Porter. And they haven't really replaced that. And so, this is one of the things that you point out as we're talking about the Nuggets. Here you go. You have it right here. They finished 25th in 3-pointers made per game last season before KCP left.
And in terms of volume, Porter, Murray, then Caldwell Pope last year.
Right. And their fourth leading volume shooter was Reggie Jackson, who actually shot it pretty well. It's the one thing he did well. And they replaced him with Russell Westbrook, who's literally the worst volume 3-point shooter in the history of the NBA.
I wouldn't let him shoot any more threes ever again, quite honestly.
I mean, the people might think that's an exaggeration, but for all the guys who've shot at least 4,000 threes in their career, he has the worst percentage of anybody out.
30%.
Yes. I mean, he shouldn't shoot any.
You wouldn't want Russell to miss here. Guys, we need volume threes. Oh, okay. No, wait, I mean, not you, Russ. Please, no.
Well, and this goes back to the choices that the Nuggets have made, right? Christian Brown has had some moments where he shot pretty well percentage-wise in the regular season. He struggled shooting in the playoffs, and he has not shot a high volume. He's probably going to be the starter. He's going to have to become a much better shooter. They got Julian Strawther, who is an interesting pick from last year's draft, had a big summer league, hit a ton of threes in the couple summer league games he played.
Out, obviously summer league is obviously not the regular season. You point out that he took 11 threes in the summer league games on average. He took 11, which means he was told,
"Oh yeah,
yes,
fire these up, sir."
Well, and that's why they drafted him to be a gunner. They drafted him to be a high volume 3-point weapon. And look, preseason last year, man, he looked good. I was excited. I was talking about him as a potential guy. And there were injury issues, and then. Look, the other simple fact of the matter, and Zach Lowe got himself caught up with the aggregators when he said something along the lines of there's a lot of noise about Michael Malone and the front office, not necessarily being eye to eye, maybe being more forehead to forehead at times. A lot of that is Malone is not a guy who wants to play young guys. He never has been. He's going to have to now. Like there's just it's not a choice at this point.
And by the way, first off, I don't disagree with Zach's statement. The other thing I will say is the idea that a coach doesn't want to play the young guys, especially when he's got a championship contending team, is as old as the NBA itself.
Right. Not unique to Michael Malone, but he definitely is more to the extreme end of that spectrum.
Even coaches and general managers who are the best of friends, the GM is always going to be more interested in the players they've drafted that they don't have to pay a lot. And the coach is always going to want the more proven entity as opposed to the developing entity. As has been, as always shall be. So this is not, it is both true and also not unexpected and not something that's unmanageable. It's one of those things that you have to challenge as you try to be a championship contender year on year on. That's part of it.
Yeah, but they need Strawther to become a quality rotation player who's knocking down a bunch of threes. And then Peyton Watson has a chance to be a really, really good role player. but he was a sub 30% 3-point shooter.
Well, there's a classic case. Malone just gave up on him last year. Right? He just stopped playing him.
Yeah.
So and I'm not
And Jeff Green
assume
was in
anything.
Houston, so you didn't have the old vet to rely on. So
Right.
suddenly,
And he did play him. He did play him during the regular season, but what we're talking about is when it really matters in the playoffs. And they stopped guarding Christian Brown and they stopped guarding Peyton Watson, and that becomes a difficult square peg to fit in a round hole. And that's the real question for these guys going into the season, especially now that KCP isn't there. Like, that starting lineup was all reliable for them. They would go back to it time and again. And now, at minimum, that's going to change. And the one other thing we should mention, since we talked a lot about Denver, we still got Aaron Gordon sitting there with 1 year left on his deal this year. That is another extension situation to monitor that is very interesting, because obviously he's a
not
massive
eligible
piece for them.
I think it's not until the end of the month. He's not eligible to extend. So that's not an issue right now. But obviously, if he's not extended before the start of the season, you're going to get some questions about that. And certainly the Nuggets they were aware of that and aware of probably of what Aaron Gordon was looking for, and had to think about the market when they made the KCP decision, when they made the Jamal Murray decision. So look, if they let KCP walk so that they could keep those two guys, and that's the decision that they made, and they're going to backfill with their young guys, that's not unreasonable. The issue is if the young guys can't step up and deliver, it becomes, start to have egg all over your face. So that's what we're talking about.
And he just for listeners, he can extend starting on September 27th. I just checked Bobby's info.
Okay. I knew it was later this month. Okay.
Yeah.
Also on your list, and as we talk about these teams on your list, Bontemps, we're going to hear this a lot. You talk about the LA Lakers and how they need a two-way wing. And many teams need two-way wings.
Yep.
I would say arguably all but maybe 3 or 4 teams would quote unquote have what you would say is enough, but it's almost like relief pitching in baseball, or starting pitching, even pitching in general. You can never have enough. You think you've got enough and you don't. The Lakers move to increase their wing depth over the offseason was to draft Dalton Connect, and in their view, to re-sign Max Christie, who was the most money they spent other than on LeBron. That was, in terms of what they did in the offseason. And basically, they seem to want to boost his role. And, look, the Bontemps, the Lakers have a basic problem, which you have discussed. Their two best offensive perimeter, guards are Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell, and those are problems defensively. And the Laker fans would scream as Darvin Ham would trot Taurean Prince out game after game after game in the starting lineup and give him minutes, but he did it because he didn't have perimeter defense. So obviously the Lakers front office felt like Max Christie should have been playing. We know this because they gave him a big 4-year contract extension. So we'll see, but you're yet to buy that. You seem to think that they definitely still need help there. And I think you're right.
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if the Lakers are going to be the championship contending team that people want them to be, you have to have, in theory, what they really need to do is turn D'Angelo Russell into a guy who can both hit threes and guard. Like, Austin Reeves is a guy they see clearly as a guy who's part of their core going forward. D'Angelo Russell is not, which is why he was on this 2-year makeshift deal in the first place. It's why he opted into his contract this summer, because he knew there wasn't going to be a big market for his services. And if you have a guy, if you just take KCP, who really the whole beginning of this is when the Lakers traded him a few years ago, if you just drop him in instead of D'Angelo Russell next to Austin Reeves, the whole Laker team looks vastly different, right? The problem they have right now is when they're trotting out that starting 5, they don't have anybody to guard the top perimeter players on the other team, and they can just attack either one of those two guys and have success. And, you've got when you have guys like Jared Vanderbilt, who's not much of a 3-point shooter, who can guard people, they just don't have a lot of 5-man groups you can put out there where you feel good about things that going both ways on the court. And as you said, everybody's trying to find these players. So the most valuable commodity in the league. I do think Max Christie is a good bet for the Lakers. He's got some athleticism. He's shown some aptitude to shoot it. Like, that's a guy where if he does develop into a guy who can do that, that's a contract that'll look great. And clearly, from the moment they hired JJ Redick, the whole talk has been development, growing players, etc. So we'll see if Dalton Connect and Max Christie can do that, but that's clearly the bet that in the short term, at least they're making, that those two guys can fill in some of those gaps. And I suspect that at some point during the season, we'll continue to hear talk about turning D'Angelo Russell's expiring contract into some other perimeter player that can guard and do some stuff on offense.
Who?
Well, I mean, again, that's the real question, right? I mean, I don't know if we really want to start getting into fake trade land, but if I'm the Lakers, if I'm trading those draft picks, I'm either getting a true star player or I'm trying to get one or preferably multiple guys that can fill that role, which again is hard to do, but that's what they have to try to do. Otherwise, they should just sit on what they have because they're not good enough.
Oh, the flip side of that is taking back a contract that maybe is not necessarily a favorable deal. Like, for example, and this is hypothetical discussion, but based on a situation that like I'll just say, we know that the Hawks have been looking to unload DeAndre Hunter, right? Who is owed about 22 this year, 23 next year, 25 the year after that. That's not a great contract. Is it worth a team like the Lakers taking on that contract? And what would be a financially motivated move for the Hawks?
Well, I'm going to tell you, the Hawks went down this road last year with the Lakers. There was a time where there was a lot of momentum, that at least on the Lakers side, where they thought they had a great chance to get DeJounte Murray. At the end of the day, D'Angelo Russell being in that deal, and I don't know if it was they were going to have a third team or whatever, but the Hawks weren't down with that at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they weren't going that direction. And so you'd be going back on old ground there where they'd already said no. Although, granted, they know that this will be the end of the year of his contract. That's exactly a different situation.
I would say the circumstances have changed where there's not a player option for the next year. Obviously that, like, if you're looking for 3-and-D wings, you're calling Sean Marks. There's no reason Dorian Finney-Smith should be in Brooklyn past the trade deadline. Now, last year, the Nets were telling teams they wanted 2 first-round picks for him. I mean, that's not going to happen, but he is the epitome of a 3-and-D wing. I think Cam Johnson is more than a 3-and-D wing. Probably not as good defensively, certainly a lot more capability offensively.
He's also got $80 million left on his deal.
Significantly more expensive. Also, from Brooklyn's perspective, he is a guy who, obviously they're going to bottom out these next couple of years, but he is a guy who, once you get to the other side of that, could be part of the formula. But
I don't anticipate him being part of the next good Nets team.
Well,
when's the next good Nets team going to be?
It's going to be in a couple of years, but I don't think Cam. But look, but Tim, DeAndre Hunter is probably not a name I'd be very excited about, but those are the kind of names, like Dorian Finney-Smith in particular. If you're a Laker fan, yes, you can like pine for Trae Young or whatever, like star player you want to get. If you go back to the formula we have seen with LeBron James that has worked for over a decade, you have LeBron James, another star player, and then a bunch of guys who could shoot and guard around him. Yep. That formula works. So if the Lakers can find a way to get closer to that formula, they have a chance to be a pretty good team in the West. And if they can get a couple of those guys, maybe they can be a team that's interesting. But it's extraordinarily hard to get those guys, and they have to get them.
When they made that run and they won the in-season tournament, they were getting that. I know that Cam Reddish was not had much of a season, but in November and December, he had a couple of really good weeks. And Cam Reddish turned into one of those types of players. He got hurt. He wasn't able to sustain. But, if you go back and watch it in-season tournament, the Lakers' wings were playing great at that time. They were swarming defensively. They played really good defense. I think they had the number 1 defense in the in-season tournament games, or at least in the top 3. So, that's right. Okay, another team you have on your list, Bontemps, in the West was the Timberwolves, where you felt that they need some more scoring in their backcourt, which they're hoping that Rob Dillingham, the guy they got the number 8 pick, they moved up, they moved into the draft and then got Dillingham out of Kentucky. I'm not sure what they're going to get from him this year, but that was an attempt to address that. They obviously saw that as well.
Yeah, it's really more just shot creation in general. As we saw last year, Minnesota had the best defense in the league, right? And they were somewhere around 15th in offense. And we all watch the Wolves a lot. Obviously, Ann is great. Karl Towns and Rudy fit a lot better together last year. Mike Conley's been a great piece. But when they struggle, it's when their offense gets stuck in the mud and they can't really get going and they can't keep up with these other teams and the way the league is now. And again, it's a huge bet by Tim Connolly to trade these assets for a really young guy in Rob Dillingham, who's an interesting piece. But like we talked about the other day when we were talking about the West tiers, like you got key contending teams in Denver and Minnesota that are putting a lot of eggs in the baskets of very young players, which is not typically what you see from teams trying to win at that level. And, Rob Dillingham and to a lesser extent, Terrence Shannon, those two guys are going to get chances to play right away.
Well, part of the reason that they did that was because it's what they could afford.
Yeah.
They can't afford to go out and get a $12 million, $13 million player. I will say this, as you remember, Mike Conley was banged up in the playoffs last year. I believe he missed a couple of games.
He did.
And when that happened, Kyle Anderson ran point. He was bringing up the ball in vitally important moments. And of course, Kyle Anderson signed in Golden State, and they also lost Monty Morris. They also played Jordan McLaughlin, who was their third string guard, in high leverage playoff situations last year. He didn't play a lot, but there were times when he was out there, and he signed. I think he signed Sacramento. Sacramento.
Yeah, he's not back in Minnesota either.
Yeah, but he re-signed elsewhere. So they're a little hollowed out in the backcourt, just in general.
They do. You mentioned the two rookies, and we've talked about it before. They need at least one of those guys to be impactful this season, if not both. At least one of those guys has to provide some juice off the bench. And then Joe Ingles was a minimum salary, low risk addition. They kind of need Joe Ingles to be a contributor, and old slow-mo Joe. He's got chemistry with Rudy Gobert. I mean, their pick and roll was potent in Utah. He's got chemistry with Conley, kind of being that secondary playmaker. Didn't play hardly. Did he play at all for Australia this summer?
I mean, he might have stepped on the court a little bit.
And he didn't play much for Milwaukee, and he played too much for Orlando. I mean, I understood why they signed him, and I get it, especially during the regular season, but if you're counting on Joe to give you any minutes in the playoffs at this point, you're probably going to be in trouble.
Well, I will say, if you're counting on Joe, it's nice to have to be able to put him on the floor with at least two all defensive players, potentially three all defensive players.
No question.
And the other thing, when you talk about Minnesota's ability to improve offensively, really the number one part of that discussion should be the continued development and ascension of Anthony Edwards, because he's still young, he's still developing. He was an all-NBA player last year, but especially in terms of his playmaking and decision-making, it's still very early in the process for him. If he takes a leap, that could be how they go from middle of the pack offensively to a top 10 type of team.
And they have, and that obviously has to happen too, right? But even still, if it's just Ant and then Rudy and then Ant and Karl and then a little bit of help, that probably isn't enough. Like you said, they need at least one of those young guys. Like if we're talking at the end of the season, we're going into the playoffs and we're talking about Rob Dillingham and or Terrence Shannon as first team all rookie guys, especially what's sort of a lesser rookie class from the initial perception. That's a very good sign for Minnesota. If those guys are maybe second team guys or not really involved, that's not a good sign. Like that's one time where there's probably nothing less important than all rookie teams, but where those guys fit into that discussion is probably going to say a lot about Minnesota's chances next spring, because they're going to need those guys to do some stuff.
All right. So there's a couple more on the West. We talked about them in previous discussions. You can check out Bontemps' story. I want to go over to what you said on the East. And it might be time to have the word of the day for MacMahon, because
Ooh.
I needed some help on this word when you talked about what you think the Milwaukee Bucks needed, which was dynamism. What is this word?
I saw that. I don't know if it's a real word. What he means is more dynamic players. I don't know if dynamic.
Dynamism?
Dynamism is a word. There's a long story about this, why this is in the story, which we will talk about at another time. But yes, the Bucks need more athleticism and more explosiveness across their roster. And the best way to highlight that is in the fact that they had 2 players on their entire team who dunked the ball at least 25 times last year. Giannis led the league in dunks. I think he had 250. And then Brook Lopez had 42 as a 7-2 guy. Nobody else on the team had 25.
As a 7-2 guy who spends a lot of offensive possessions stationed 25 feet away from the basket.
Yes. And is also not known, he's not exactly a leaper either, Brook. I mean, he's dunking because he's 7'2" and could just touch the rim standing there. But
so I just want to, this is a fascinating stat. I commend you for talking about it. I'm trying to decide whether tracking how many dunks a team has really relates to how dynamic their players.
Listen, I'll say this.
But I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying.
I mean, it's
the
sort
Mavericks
of a
went from a very low dunk team to one of the highest dunk teams last year. And Jay Kidd's thing was, we can compete in the layup lines now. But there and that athleticism absolutely helped them from going from a lottery team that was a total embarrassment with 2 stars to a finals team.
Well, I will give you this. When you bring in Derek Lively,
Derek
PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr., like, you're definitely bringing athleticism. I mean, that's
Daniel
true.
Gafford.
Daniel Gafford, one of the most athletic bigs in the league. But again, I don't think that dunks are a be all end all either. But it's a way to emphasize more than anything how old the Bucks are.
Dunks are an easy indicator of athleticism. It's not, you're not saying,
how many dunks did Joe Ingles have last year? I'm going to look it up.
Well, Joe Ingles probably hasn't had a dunk in a while, but yeah, like Damian Lillard in his mid-30s, Chris Middleton coming off 2 ankle surgeries in his mid-30s, Pat Connaughton now in his 30s. He's lost a little bit of juice athletically. Bobby Portis is 29. Even the guys that they went and signed, guys like DeLon Wright, who was, I thought, a really good signing. He's in his early 30s. Like, they've got an old team, and it's sort of the complete opposite of what we talked about with like Denver is one example, right? Like Milwaukee is like those late stage LeBron Cavs teams where it's basically all vets, and with the one notable exception being Gary Trent, which, as we've talked about, might wind up being one of the best value signs of the entire summer.
What did you say? The number was 25?
Yes.
Does Joe Ingles have more or less than 25 dunks in his career?
I'm going to say less.
What'd you say, MacMahon?
I can tell you. I'm looking at it right now. Do you want to guess?
No, I have it. I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I'm sure you both have it up. I'm saying less than that.
23. The last dunk he had was in 2021. His head coach, Jamal Mosley, had more dunks than Joe did. Mosley, one of the stars of my coaches.
Yes, that was a great story. If people didn't see it, Tim's story on coaches dunking. It was a really good story.
Now do a story on Bucks dunking, MacMahon.
I did some.
But look, the Bucks are. If you look, if you look at who the Bucks are playing in the playoffs, right? You look at the Celtics and the athleticism they have on the perimeter with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White. You look at the Knicks with Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby and Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart. You look at the Sixers with Tyrese Maxey, with Paul George, with even guys like Kelly Oubre. They've got a lot. These teams have a lot of dynamic, athletic players on the wings. Mm-hmm. And who is guarding them for the Bucks? Like, yeah, Gary Trent is going to have to be the guy getting all these assignments, which is a big responsibility for him. Perhaps he could turn into a big pay next summer if he has a great year. But outside of him, you're talking about a lot of guys in their early to mid 30s with a lot of miles on the tire, led by Chris Middleton in particular, who, there's just huge questions about his ability to stay healthy. And we've seen when he is good, the Bucks look really good. But he's coming off these double ankle surgeries, and he's missed a lot of time the last couple of years. And when he's not out there, they're a totally different team.
Yeah, or young guys who aren't ready.
Yes. That
Who
too.
had more dunks last year, Pat Connaughton or Dame Lillard?
Oh, Connaughton.
I'm pretty sure Dame did.
Dame, 8-3.
Wow, really? What's
That's-
up with
I-
Connaughton? That's surprising.
Well, again, the dunks were a stand-in for the overall athleticism of the team. But if you bounce around and look at other teams, I checked to see like how valid of a stat it was, and then I looked around, and most other teams had several guys.
I'm
over
having fun.
25.
I'm having fun with this. But by the way, Steph Curry in his career, more or less than 25 dunks.
I'm going to say less.
I'll go more on him.
26.
Oh, okay.
Boom, baby.
Now,
There you go.
Hey, sometimes the dunking doesn't come until the 30s. Kyrie had a career high 6 last year.
wow. Well, I'll say this
Including
year,
two lobs.
this summer, in London, there was like 15,000 fans in the O2 Arena to watch Steph warm up. Because when they ever going to get to see him, and it was an incredible environment, and you can tell that Steph got totally charged by doing it, and he threw down a dunk in warmups, which the crowd went crazy. Last dunk in an NBA regular season game, I haven't looked at the playoffs. I will in a second here. 2018-19.
Wow.
I mean, he's doing just fine. You don't have to dunk. I'm just saying that since Bontemps brought this up, I think it's a fascinating. He has not dunked in the playoffs since 2014-15. So
Well,
You heard it from Windy aggregators. He's saying Steph's washed.
I'm saying he's not washed. I'm saying he dunked in London so it's there. Anyway, he doesn't have to dunk. He's doing just fine. He just got a $62 million extension. He doesn't need to
but
dunk.
Milwaukee's athleticism is something to really study this year, I think. And look, a lot of that too, like Dame obviously has never been a dunker, but like Dame disappointed last year. Like, let's see where he's at. Full training camp, full summer in Milwaukee, got total stability with the coaching staff after everything that happened last year. Like, look, this is a huge year for the Bucks across the board. And again, if we're talking about, John Horst, one of the more aggressive GMs in the league, he's typically always doing something at the trade deadline. We'll see if they can add some athleticism on the wing during the season. I suspect that's what they'll be trying to do.
All right, talking about other Eastern Conference contenders, you were looking at the 76ers. You talked about their need for front court size. Bontemps.
Embiid's not big enough for you?
Well, this just goes to their power forward spot. Our guy Stats Williams had a great statistic, as he always does, where Caleb Martin currently is, I think, going to be their starting power forward.
Caleb Martin had 18 dunks last year, by the way.
Right. You could argue it's somebody else, but Caleb Martin would be the shortest power forward in the league, and I would assume by a decent amount for stats. I mean, you could assume, I guess, like Zion is 6'6", but Zion's also twice the size of Caleb Martin. So I don't think that size is really an issue there.
Okay, but why is Caleb Martin the power forward and not Paul George? I mean,
Paul George is also not power forward size either. That's the point. Like they have a lot of talent, and they've done a great job this summer putting as much talent together as they could, but they don't really have a lot of typical forward size. Like, for example,
what's power forward size?
Well, when they play the Knicks, who's guarding Julius Randle?
I think we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Gershon Yabusele.
Well, I mean, yes, like they did take an interesting flyer on Yabusele after he played pretty well.
How many
for
dunks
France.
does Yabusele have in his career in the NBA?
Not many, because he didn't do much of anything.
I'm sorry. I just love this. I'm actually super interested.
Dunks are a fun stat. Dunks are a fun stat.
He has 3. He played 2 seasons in Boston.
He played about 7 minutes total. So, I mean, but when they play
I guarantee
Giannis,
he dunked a lot of donuts during his time in Boston too.
Oh, wow. When they play against Giannis, when they play against even guys like Scotty Barnes or Paolo Banchero, they don't have a lot of size on the roster to handle these bigger wings that a lot of teams in the league have. Obviously, they've got good defensive players, and Caleb Martin's a fine defensive player. Paul George is a great wing defender. So they've got a lot of shoot. They can do a lot of stuff, but that is sort of the one notable hole from their summer. And the one thing you could say that's a disappointment for the Sixers from the way everything went is they were really close to getting Nick Batum back. He was going back and forth between, at least my understanding was going back to Philly or going back to the team that traded him, the Clippers. And I think family played a part in him going back to the Clippers. He was pretty comfortable out in LA. Obviously, he slotted in perfectly for them as a power forward with 6'9", 6'10", with super long reach, can guard a bunch of bigger players. He was a critical piece for them last year. If he's on the roster, things look a lot different. It'll be interesting to see what Daryl Morey can do over the next couple months. They've got KJ Martin on basically a human trade exception contract to turn him into some kind of player over the course of the season. I'd be stunned if he's on the roster past the trade deadline in February. And I suspect if they add a piece during the season, it's going to be some bigger wing that can take on the physicality of these bigger players in the East. Because you look at their competition, whether it's Brown and Tatum, or at least for now, Julius Randle, we'll see what happens with the Knicks, or Giannis with the Bucks, or Pascal Siakam with the Pacers, or Paolo Banchero with the Magic, Evan Mobley, if he's playing power forward for the Cavs. All these teams are playing 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" guys at the 4, and the Sixers currently have a 6'5" guy.
How many dunks does 76ers backup point guard Kyle Lowry have in his career?
I'm going to take under 25 on that one.
I'm going to guess.
I'll give you that.
I'm going to guess
under 10.
I'm going to guess 5.
The answer is 2, but that's not the most fascinating thing. Kyle Lowry's last dunk was in the 2007-8 season, age 21, with the Memphis Grizzlies.
Oh my God!
Listen, I have no dunks in my career. The man has made like $400 million. He's got a ring. I'm just telling you. He's opened up an incredible thing here. I'm enjoying it.
How many teams has he been on since his last dunk? That is actually impressive.
Well, he played 3 years in Memphis.
That was in Memphis, right? Or was that was in Houston?
No, it was in Memphis. He had one dunk in his
Houston, Toronto, Miami, and Philly.
Yeah.
So 4.
It's been 16 years. It's been 16 years since he dunked in a game.
Does Charlotte count as a team?
No, he never.
I want now dunks. We don't have dunk stats from back in the day, but I wonder, as far as the dunk tracking era, what is the longest time a player has gone without a dunk? He might have it. 16 years. You don't see many 16-year. Yeah, you don't see many 16-year careers. Period.
Yeah, it's an interesting
That
question.
Pretty incredible.
I'll check. I'll have Stats Williams get into it. I'll come back with the answer to that.
Have many dunks did Bob Pettit have? Do we have that?
They couldn't dunk on those peach baskets.
You'd have to stop the game. You might have to send everybody home.
That's right. And you get splinters.
By the way, according to the stats, which I don't know how complete they are, in the regular season, Shaquille O'Neal had 2,600 career dunks.
A lot of dunks.
He had another 500 in the playoffs. Okay, you also have on your list here the New York Knicks. We've talked about this with their situation at center. They're really relying heavily on Mitchell Robinson, who, by the way, ended last year injured. He had multiple ankle injuries last year. He's had injuries throughout his career. The Knicks have already been sniffing around trying to get another center. This is something we've talked about, Bontemps. This isn't just a luxury item. This is, this is not something like, a final piece. Like they truly may need another guy here because they have to be prepared that Mitchell's going to miss some games.
Well, he could miss time. And look, Tom Thibodeau has basically always wanted to have a 7-foot rim protector on the court at all times. He's been one of the best defensive coaches in the league for a long time, and that's been a bedrock principle for him. He's not been a guy who's typically played very small. He's almost always had a center. He's almost always had a defense funneling the ball to the rim, where the center is making plays at the rim. And with Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein, they didn't have a dominant center, but they had 48 minutes of really high-level center play when they were both healthy. And Isaiah Hartenstein was a huge piece for the Knicks last year, and losing him, like that is the one thing for all the moves they made this summer. They did not replace him. And so right now you're looking at a situation where, let's say Mitchell Robinson is out there and playing. He's probably not playing more than 28 minutes a game anyway. And then you're maybe playing Precious Achiuwa at center, who's already a 6'7" guy. It's really more of a small ball option anyway, even though he played pretty well for them after coming over in the OG Anunoby trade. They could play Jericho Sims, who's a raw 7-footer, but is kind of a project third center at this point. Not a guy who you want to be playing a ton of minutes if you're competing for championships like the Knicks hope to. And so the other option is to play small and to try to play OG Anunoby at center in lineups with Julius Randle and Mikal Bridges and either DiVincenzo or Hart and Brunson, and try to go small and space the floor and fly up and down the court and not necessarily have a typical traditional rim protector out there. OG Anunoby can do that. He can play the 5, but that's not something Tom Thibodeau has typically wanted to do in the past. And this is going to be one of the real subplots in the East of the season, is this Knicks roster and how it evolves and how it specifically relates back to Julius Randle and his contractual situation. Because as long as he is going into the last year of his deal, he's got a player option for $30.9 million for the 25-26 season. As long as he's not extended, like Brandon Ingram, like we've talked about, like Jimmy Butler, like we've talked about, a bunch of these guys going into the last year of their deal, as long as they're not signed, there's going to be questions hovering over all of them about what's their future with their respective teams. And certainly in New York, where everybody's fired up about the Knicks beyond belief, and they made the big Mikal Bridges trade, they signed OG Anunoby, everybody's thinking they could compete with Boston at the top of the East. Well, let's see what happens with Julius Randle. And if he does end up getting moved, you would think it would be to, in part, address this hole they've got at center.
Well, and there's especially going to be those kind of questions if he's doing things like posting on Instagram about the lack of placement of his jersey in the Madison Square Garden memorabilia shops.
What if his jersey was sold out? What if that's why his jersey wasn't in the team shop?
Oh, that's a good question. I encourage Bontemps. You're going to be there for Knicks Media Day. I encourage. The one good thing is typically the New York media is very patient, very understanding. They can lob a bunch of softballs up there, and they won't try to stir anything up with a potentially volatile situation like Julius Randle, a guy who's been an All-NBA player, going into the year with his contract situation uncertain, and clearly not being a Villanova alum, which makes him an exception in that rotation.
Well, we're doing a live podcast this weekend in Akron, Ohio. Or this coming week, I should say. There was a live podcast this past weekend in Central Park, a couple blocks from my house, that I forgot the address to because I haven't been there in so long. And Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart were up there, and Mikal Bridges was up there as their guest. And so I am.
How'd they get him?
It's they found his number somewhere, I'm sure.
Those guys get good guests.
But it's this whole situation is worth monitoring. And again, like Brandon Ingram, like Jimmy Butler, like some of these other guys, this is something to monitor throughout the season where it lands, especially again when the Knicks have this hole in their roster and they've got a star player, even if he's got some flaws. Julius Randle's a really good player who is going into the last year of his deal. And if he ends up being the centerpiece of a trade, that in theory should get them back something pretty good.
Who had more dunks last year, Trae Young or Jalen Brunson?
I'm going to say 0 for both.
Bontemps, you have an answer?
I am going to say Jalen, because I'm pretty sure he had one that was pretty memorable, because I think everybody went crazy about it, and I'm guessing Trae had none.
Trae has not yet dunked in his NBA career. Jalen had 3 dunks last year and has 14.
3 dunks?
3 dunks last year.
I remembered at least one last year that happened in a game that was.
I did too. I knew he'd had, so that's why I looked up. He actually has 14 in his career.
Okay, I'm impressed. Wow, that threw me off. This wouldn't be a Julius Randle conversation, but Wendy, you brought up Portland's logjam at center, and Robert Williams potentially being
also. Actually, Jalen had one in the playoffs last year. He had 4 total. Sorry.
Oh, thanks. How many dunks does Robert Williams have in his career? And could
I don't think he had any last year.
Well, no, last year he certainly didn't have many minutes. Is that a guy who could potentially end up being part of the solution for the Knicks?
Well, we have to see. no one is really 100% sure what Portland is going to do with its roster. It doesn't seem like the pieces that they have and the direction of the organization completely align. But I didn't understand why they gave Jeremy Grant a 5-year contract extension, knowing that Dame was going to ask for a trade. And I'm okay with re-signing him, but when you sign him to 5 years, you made it almost impossible or next to impossible to get good value in a trade. So I didn't understand that. They signed him after Dame asked for the trade. By the way, Robert Williams had 5 dunks last year in 6 games. So I think he was on 2 years ago in Boston. He had 157.
And he did.
He was a beast that year. Whew.
By the way,
Anyway.
I can just imagine how the call to Joe Cronin is. This is Leon Rose asking about Time Lord. Listen, the guy you really want is DeAndre Ayton.
Right. Well, we'll see how much Donovan Clingan ends up playing. Let's see how he looks. But if Donovan Clingan is looking like a guy that should be getting playing time, like it's hard to, even if you don't want to trade Robert Williams, I'm sure. I mean, look, when they drafted Donovan Clingan, they knew that they were going to create an issue with their center position. So when they made that decision, they had to know, they had to have some idea what they were doing. And I mean, Ayton's trade value right now is not great based on the couple of years left he's got at the max on his contract. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that this for sure they would do that, but I think we'll see how Clingan looks, and I just can't believe they wouldn't try to make sure he would get playing time. So we also have to see how healthy Robert Williams is. I mean, like I said, he played 6 games last year. You have to look at what he looks like. I mean, to me,
not a lot the year before that. I mean, it's not like a 1-year thing.
But God, when he plays, is he a difference-making player? Holy Moses.
Well, we've talked about it before, but you've got the 3 guards. You got Simons, Scoot Henderson, and Jaden Sharp. It's hard to play all 3 of them together. You just traded for Denny Avia. He's going to start. They have Jeremy Grant. He doesn't really fit long-term, you would think, with that team. You've got DeAndre Ayton in front of Donovan Clingan. He doesn't really fit long-term there either. You've got Robert Williams, who, if he is healthy, as we've again talked about, he's a guy that teams are going to be interested in trying to get on a pretty good contract, and a guy who's shown an ability to be a really impact difference-making player, even in a 20-minute-a-game role. So Portland's one of these teams with some talent on its roster that is going to come up a lot in discussions because they have a lot of different pieces they can put out there in trades, and they also should be pretty motivated to move them to clear playing time, like you said, right, for Donovan Clingan, for Shaedon Sharp. Like, those guys should be playing 30 minutes a game. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense if they're getting held back for, mid-career veterans that are not going to be long-term parts of the Blazers' future.
All right. Well, Bontemps, more good work by you. There's some other notes in there as well that you should check out on those 2 stories. They're on ESPN's NBA page. Not a lot of competition on there right now, but Bontemps is shining through. Nobody dominates September like Tim Bontemps. All right. Thank you for listening and watching Hoop Collective. And gentlemen and Jackson, see you guys in a few days in Akron, Ohio. Should be lovely. By the way, I think there is a couple of tickets left if you want to join us. hoopcollective.eventbrite.com. Come see us at St. Vincent St. Mary High School on Friday. Proceeds are going to go to the high school. So trust me, Bontemps and MacMahon aren't getting any of that money.
Maybe you'll get paying a lie.
Maybe you'll get a hat.
We'll be lucky if Wendy even buys us dinner. Jeez.
You will be lucky because it ain't happening. This means send somebody else that bill. All right, we'll see you guys in a couple of days, and should have some fun this weekend.
Adios, amigos.